So as we head into the final days of the legislative session, a new poll from Siena College shows that passage of ethics reform and a property tax cap continue to be the most important issues to voters. The survey out today found that 37% of New Yorkers picked the tax cap as a top priority, while 22% chose ethics reform. However, only 14% share Governor Cuomo's urgency on his third signature issue, legalization of same-sex marriage. Joining me now to delve deeper into these numbers is Siena College pollster Steve Greenberg. Steve, thanks so much for your time. It's great to see you.
Good to see you, Liz.
Okay, so you know what's really amazing here before we even get to who's who and what's what?
What?
Even if the governor gets 0, which we know isn't going to happen, he won't get blamed. I find that amazing.
Well, I mean, the governor has done a great job of laying the political and PR groundwork for himself, such that when we ask supporters of all these various issues, if it doesn't happen, who are you going to blame? The governor, the Democrats who control the Assembly, or the Republicans who control the Senate? Virtually no one's blaming the governor on any of these issues. He has been seen as the guy who's been forceful, who's been out there, and it doesn't hurt the fact that more than two-thirds of voters view Andrew Cuomo favorably, while by a 2-to-1 margin they view the Assembly and the Senate unfavorably.
Well, but yet they seem more inclined to blame the Senate Republicans for things rather than the Assembly Democrats. Why is that?
Oh, it's really a little bit. I mean, on the issue of same-sex marriage, clearly the supporters there overwhelmingly blame Senate Republicans if it doesn't happen.
Well, they're right.
Yeah, well, that's good when the voters are right. No, but what I'm saying is upstate, downstate, Democrat, Republican, Independent, everybody will blame, every supporter, or the majority, the vast majority of supporters of same-sex marriage will blame the Senate Republicans if that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But let's look at tax cap and ethics for a second. On those two issues, the majority of Democrats, if it doesn't happen, are going to blame Senate Republicans. The majority, and almost an identical number of Republicans, are going to blame Assembly Democrats. Then we take a step back and look at where independents are at. On the issue of the property tax cap, independents are virtually evenly divided. And on the issue of the ethics reform legislation, more independents are going to blame Senate Republicans than Assembly Democrats if it doesn't happen.
You know, if you look at the breakdown of these numbers and you ask people, you asked a host of questions sort of to set it up, do you support or oppose, and then these top issues? The strongest support, although there's support across the board depending on where you are for various different things, do you support requiring full disclosure of legislators' outside income and clients? 81%.
Absolutely. Look, and Liz, you and I have talked about this before. Ethics reform, just the name, ethics reform, has always enjoyed widespread support among voters. The difference this year, and it's the first time in my lifetime that I can ever remember this happening, the difference this year is that while in addition to supporting it, they have raised it to a tier 1 issue. It used to be, we support it, but you know what, we don't really care. Now, ethics reform is as important as a pocketbook issue, an economic issue, like a property tax cap, and that I've never seen before.
Well, that again is also it's probably for a host of different reasons. One, the governor elevated it and has been running on this since 2010, almost more than anything else. This and the tax cap neck and neck a little bit. And then also, look, you've just seen sort of a parade of lawmakers either going to jail or being accused of things. And finally, people just have to say, okay, enough already, I get it, enough.
Absolutely. And look, we know that for many years, voters have been unhappy with the legislature, have been unhappy with state government. It's now risen. All of those factors that you just mentioned, plus the long-term dislike of the legislature, has made this issue rise to a top-tier issue.
Yeah, but you also didn't say, I mean, look, ethics reform is more than just disclosure of outside income, and I think that's where things get a little sticky, because the reform bill, as I've discussed on this show with a bunch of different people now, has actually been a little bit come under fire because of the structure of the outside entity that will be overseeing various different legislators, because of, you know, the governor had to trade to get some things. But what voters understand is that he comes out a winner here.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, in our ideal world, we would take apart this ethics bill and ask about each of the individual components. That's a little bit difficult to do, a little bit inside the beltway, if you will. So we didn't ask voters about the setup of the commission, 8 members from the legislature, 4 Ds, 4 Rs, 6 from the governor. We didn't get into all of that. We just talked about the issue generally. But generally what we know is that voters care about ethics reform. They want the legislature to pass it. It's almost as important in their minds as is the property tax cap. And while they are supportive of other issues as well, those have become the second-tier issues, be it same-sex marriage or rent legislation or an independent commission for redistricting.
Yeah.
The one exception, by the way, ethics and property tax cap, and I should say it the other way around, property tax cap and ethics are 1 and 2 upstate and downstate suburbs, 1 and 2 among Democrats, Republicans, and independents.
Right.
The one exception is New York City, where ethics, property tax cap, and rent, all 3 of those virtually tie for the top spot.
Yeah, and that makes sense because the preponderance of apartments that are actually impacted by the rent laws are actually in New York City. There are some in the outer-lying suburbs, but mostly it's in those 5 boroughs.
Absolutely. I think the surprising piece there is that property tax also rose to the same level in New York
because
City.
the speaker has linked the 2 of them together, and I think that people in New York City are hip to that. They get it, right?
I think so, and also while New York City is excluded from the property tax cap bill that is being circulated right now, or that has been agreed to, I'm not sure that New York City voters know that. And while the vast majority of Manhattan residents live in high-rises and apartments, a lot of outer borough residents, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, and even the Bronx, they live in 1 and 2 family houses, and they do pay property taxes.
Yeah, well, and also, look, we've said this before, too. If you are living in an apartment, you are actually paying property taxes. It's part of your rent.
Yeah, although vast majority of New Yorkers, I don't think, understand that. And also, in fairness, New York City property taxes are relatively low, but that's because they pay a city income tax.
Well, and also because there are so many commercial properties. Let's just move on to 2 things that I found also surprising. You included 2 sort of outlier policy issues. One of them is MMA, mixed martial arts, as we like to call it, ultimate fighting.
Yep.
Actually, it was Governor Pataki, I believe, who banned that, saying that it was too barbaric in New York. And actually, he's come around now, and a lot of other people have. We've had them on the show saying, look, there are rules. You can tap out, which you can't even do in boxing. And yet, 55% of New Yorkers say, don't legalize that.
Absolutely. 55% say don't legalize it. 39% legalize it. And it doesn't, here's another example. This is not a partisan issue. Democrats, Republicans, Independents all oppose legalizing it. It's not an upstate, downstate issue. All 3 regions of the state oppose legalizing it. What we see here is not dissimilar to same-sex marriage. Young people, those voters under 35 overwhelmingly support legalizing it. Those voters over 55 overwhelmingly oppose legalizing it.
Let's also just one more thing briefly here because we've almost run out of time. Wine and grocery stores. I can't say I'm terribly surprised about this, except you haven't really heard, except for the advocates are sort of plugging away, you haven't heard a lot about it, and yet people pretty much support it. Why not? If you can sell beer, you might as well go ahead and sell wine.
I think the majority of voters made it clear, 59% of them say they'd like to be able to walk into their supermarket or their local grocery store and buy wine there. Sienna has asked about this issue several times over the last several years, but we haven't asked about it since April 2010, a little over a year ago. Virtually unchanged. The numbers haven't moved in a year. The majority of people support it. Just one interesting anomaly, because it's got support upstate and downstate, Democrat, Republican. There's only 2 demographic groups that oppose it, and albeit very closely oppose it. Conservative voters and African-American voters. Not 2 groups that you normally see aligned on an issue question.
Interesting. Well, and look, in Florida, you can walk into your local drugstore and CVS and get a bottle of wine, a fairly decent one, too, actually. So I think it's...
You could do it in the gas station. They do it in drive-thrus in Florida.
It's probably really just a matter of time. But anyway, we shall see. It could be a big revenue boon for the state. I'm not necessarily sure it's going to happen before the end of the week. But every day is like a year when it comes to the end of the session. I want to thank you, Steve Greenberg, for being here. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Liz.